the medieval world was harsh, violent, and deeply unforgiving. Life was not designed for comfort or ease, but for endurance. Most people were born into suffering and died within it, never knowing anything beyond struggle. From the moment the sun rose to the moment it disappeared behind cold horizons, survival demanded constant effort. Hunger was a familiar companion, pain was expected, and fear quietly shaped every decision. There was little room for rest, and even less for hope. Disease moved through villages like an invisible predator. Without understanding germs or infection, people watched helplessly as loved ones fell ill overnight. A simple wound could become fatal, and common fevers were often death sentences. Plagues arrived without warning, wiping out entire communities. Bells rang constantly for the dead, and graves filled faster than prayers could be spoken. Death was not a distant idea. It was something people saw, smelled, and lived with every day. Hunger was another relentless enemy. Poor harvests, harsh winters, and heavy taxation meant that many families survived on scraps. Bread was often stale, meat was rare, and famine was never far away. Children grew up weak and malnourished, while adults worked until their bodies broke down. For peasants tied to the land, escape was impossible. The fields demanded labor, no matter how sick or exhausted the body felt. War, too, was a constant presence. Kingdoms fought endlessly over land, power, and pride. Armies marched through villages, taking food, burning homes, and leaving destruction behind. Young men were forced into battle, with little training and even less protection. Survival was a matter of chance, not skill. Those who returned carried scars, both visible and unseen, that never truly healed. Daily labor crushed both body and spirit. Most people worked from dawn until darkness, performing repetitive, backbreaking tasks. Farmers plowed frozen soil with bare hands. Blacksmiths inhaled smoke and heat. Servants lived under the control of others, with no freedom of choice. There were no days off, no guarantees, and no safety nets. Exhaustion was normal. Pain was expected. Complaining changed nothing. Religion offered meaning, but it also carried fear. The church taught that suffering was part of God's plan, a test of faith. Pleasure was often viewed with suspicion, and indulgence was labeled sinful. Hell was described in terrifying detail, and salvation felt uncertain. People feared not only death, but what might come after it. This spiritual pressure weighed heavily on already exhausted minds. In such a world, the human mind searched desperately for relief. People did not seek pleasure in the modern sense. They sought escape. Even a brief moment of numbness, calm, or forgetfulness was valuable. The idea of silencing pain, even temporarily, felt like mercy. Anything that softened reality, blurred fear, or slowed time became precious. Without science or modern medicine, people turned to what they had. They observed nature closely, learning through trial and error. They noticed how certain drinks made the body relax, how some plants caused sleep, dreams, or strange sensations. This knowledge spread quietly. Others poured between neighbors, healers, and travelers. It was dangerous knowledge, but desperation made it irresistible. Alcohol became one of the simplest and most accessible forms of escape. It warmed the body, dulled pain, and lifted heavy thoughts. For a few hours, laughter replaced fear, and exhaustion faded into a distant hum. In taverns and homes, people drank not to celebrate, but to survive another day. Others sought deeper forms of relief. They experimented with herbs, roots, and mixtures whose effects were unpredictable. Some caused peaceful sleep, others intense visions. Some relieved pain, while others led to madness or death. The risks were high, but so was the reward. The chance to feel something other than suffering. In the medieval world, escaping the mind was not a luxury. It was a coping mechanism, a way to endure a life that offered little kindness. Long before modern drugs and laboratories, people were already searching for altered states of consciousness. Not for pleasure alone, but for survival in a world that rarely showed mercy. Even without modern drugs, medieval people understood that the human mind could be changed. They did not speak of chemistry or neuroscience. Yet they knew that certain substances could soften pain, distort reality, or carry the mind somewhere else entirely. This understanding did not come from books or laboratories, but from centuries of observation, failure, and survival. Knowledge was earned through suffering, and every discovery carried a cost. Much of what medieval people knew about altering the mind was passed down quietly through generations. Grandmothers whispered recipes to daughters. Healers taught apprentices which plants to touch and which to fear. Travelers shared stories of strange brews tasted in distant lands. This knowledge was rarely written down because writing was dangerous. If the wrong person found these secrets, accusations of heresy or witchcraft could follow. So the wisdom lived in memory, spoken softly and guarded carefully. Experimentation was constant, though rarely controlled. People tested plants by watching animals eat them, or by trying tiny amounts themselves. Some substances made the body heavy and the thoughts slow. Others caused laughter, visions, or deep sleep. There were no measurements, no safe dosages. Only instinct and experience. Many experiments ended badly. Illness, madness, and death were common outcomes. Yet the lessons survived, carved into memory by pain. Desperation erased fear. When life offered nothing but labor and loss, the risk of poisoning felt small. People already lived close to death, so the possibility of escape, even a dangerous one, felt worth the gamble. A substance that brought peace for an hour was more valuable than safety, that offered no relief at all. Nature was both teacher and threat. Forests, fields, and graveyards held plants of immense power. Some calmed the nerves and eased pain. Others opened the mind in unsettling ways, causing dreams while awake. Medieval people believed these effects came from spirits, demons, or divine forces, because they had no other explanation. The experience felt supernatural, and so it was treated as such. Healers played a central role in this hidden world of knowledge. They were not doctors in the modern sense, but observers of cause and effect. They knew which roots numbed pain during childbirth, which herbs helped the sick sleep, and which mixtures could quiet the mind. Their success made them valuable, but also dangerous. A healer who knew too much could easily become a target. Mistakes were unforgiving. A plant that healed in one dose could kill in another. Some substances caused slow poisoning, building inside the body over time. Others acted quickly, stopping the breath or stealing the mind forever. Families mourned quietly, knowing that curiosity had taken another life. Still, the knowledge was not abandoned. The human desire to escape suffering proved stronger than fear of consequences. People were willing to endure nausea, confusion, and terror if it meant relief from pain or grief. Altering the mind became a form of survival, not indulgence. It allowed people to endure loss, hunger, and exhaustion without breaking completely. Religious belief complicated this pursuit. The Church warned against altering the mind, calling it sinful or demonic. Yet many clergy quietly relied on the same remedies. Pain did not respect faith, and even the most devoted believer sought relief when suffering became unbearable. This contradiction was rarely spoken aloud. Over time, patterns emerged. Certain substances became trusted, others feared. The knowledge grew slowly, shaped by tragedy and survival. Medieval people did not understand how these substances worked, but they understood their effects. They learned when to seek them and when to avoid them. In a world without modern medicine, altering the mind was an act of courage and desperation. It was an attempt to control something, anything, in a life ruled by forces beyond human control. through risk and repetition, medieval people built a dangerous, fragile understanding of intoxication, one that would shape human behavior long before science gave it a name. Alcohol was the most common and widely accepted form of intoxication in medieval life. Unlike today, where alcohol is often consumed for celebration, pleasure, or socializing, in the Middle Ages, it was as essential as food or shelter. It was not considered a luxury. It was a daily necessity, woven into the fabric of survival. The harsh reality of life demanded something to soften the constant weight of labor, hunger, and fear, and alcohol provided a temporary refuge. A sip of beer or wine could warm the body, lighten the mind, and dull the unending pain that defined existence. Clean drinking water was a rare commodity. Rivers and wells were often contaminated, carrying invisible diseases that could cripple or kill. Even in towns and villages, there were no guarantees of safe water. People learned early that consuming these sources could bring fever, vomiting, or even death. As a result, weak alcoholic beverages became a safer alternative. Brewing was simple, requiring minimal ingredients, and even a low-strength drink could neutralize the dangers lurking in water. The logic was clear: a mild buzz was preferable to the slow, invisible threat of disease. Beer and all were the most common, though wine was also popular in regions where vineyards thrived. Brewing was a domestic art, practiced in almost every home. Families, monasteries, and small taverns produced small batches for daily consumption. For adults, beer became part of every meal. For children, weak beer offered hydration without the dangers of polluted water, though it also slowly introduced them to the intoxicating world that adults depended on. Even infants sometimes consumed watered down brews when no other option existed. Alcohol, in many ways, was a lifeline, quietly integrated into survival from the earliest days of life. The effects of alcohol were subtle at first, but profoundly important. A small sip could warm the skin and relax the muscles after a long day in the fields. The mind, burdened with toil and grief, experienced a temporary release. Laughter came easier, fatigue became lighter, and pain, though still present, retreated for a while. Even a brief reprieve was treasured. It was not about indulgence. It was about endurance. To be intoxicated was to feel human for a few precious hours, even in a world defined by suffering. Taverns, inns, and homes became centers of communal intoxication. In villages, the arrival of a traveling brewer or the opening of a new batch could turn a dull day into one of shared relief. Music, storytelling, and laughter accompanied drinking, creating fleeting moments of joy amidst hardship. Even those too exhausted to drink found comfort in the presence of others, softened by the same beverages. Alcohol was a social glue, as much as it was a personal escape, connecting people through shared experience of fleeting freedom. The use of alcohol extended beyond mere consumption for pleasure or safety. It also had medicinal purposes. Monks and healers often incorporated beer and wine into treatments. A warm wine might soothe the stomach, ease fevers, or calm a restless patient. Alcohol was sometimes mixed with herbs to enhance its effects or to mask the bitterness of medicinal plants. In every case, it functioned as both therapy and survival strategy, a dual purpose born of necessity and observation. Despite its ubiquity, alcohol carried dangers. Weak drinks were generally safe, but stronger brews could quickly overwhelm. Without understanding of dosage, even adults could succumb to drunkenness, making mistakes, anger, or accidents more likely. For children, the long-term effects of early exposure are unknown, but the medieval mind placed practicality above caution. Survival demanded pragmatism, and the risks were accepted as part of daily life. The culture surrounding alcohol was both protective and instructive. Knowledge of when, how, and how much to drink was passed down orally, taught from one generation to the next. People learned by observing elders, by trial and error, and through communal norms. Drinking was rarely an isolated act. It was a shared ritual that taught restraint, timing, and the boundaries of intoxication. Alcohol was simultaneously a medicine, a shield against disease, a coping mechanism, and a teacher in the delicate art of survival. Ultimately, alcohol in the medieval era was not simply a drink. It was an instrument of life. It eased hunger, protected against sickness, softened labor, and offered the mind a brief escape from unrelenting suffering. It was present at births and deaths, at work and play, in the homes of peasants and in the halls of monasteries. In a world without modern comfort or science, alcohol allowed humans to survive, not just physically, but psychologically, by offering a fleeting glimpse of freedom from the harshness of existence. It was one of the few constants in a world where life was fragile, fleeting, and brutal. Some people went far beyond alcohol in their pursuit of relief from the harshness of medieval life. While beer and wine offered temporary warmth and comfort, they were limited in their effects. Those seeking a deeper escape, something that could transform the mind entirely, take them out of their body, or dissolve the pain of daily existence, looked to the natural world. Herbs and plants often growing wild in forests, fields, or even graveyards, became the key. What we consider poisonous today was, for them, a form of medicine, a secret bridge between suffering and temporary freedom. The knowledge of these substances was passed down in whispers, guarded carefully within families, villages, and among the few who practiced herbal medicine. There were no guidebooks, no warnings from authorities who understood chemistry, no labels telling one what might kill or what might heal. Instead, medieval people relied on centuries of observation and experimentation. They watched animals interact with certain plants, noted which roots relieved pain or induced sleep, and slowly pieced together the effects of herbs through trial and error. Each success offered a fleeting glimpse of mastery over the body, and each failure reminded them of the ever-present risk of death. These plants had powerful effects on the brain. Some could dull physical pain almost entirely, allowing a laborer to continue through exhaustion or an injured knight to move with surprising strength. Others affected the senses and perception, creating visions that were interpreted as spiritual messages, divine revelations, or curses from malevolent forces. A single leaf or root, carefully prepared, could make the world shimmer, warp, and feel entirely unreal. Sounds could seem amplified or distorted, colors could brighten unnaturally, and ordinary surroundings could feel charged with a sense of magic. For the medieval mind, unacquainted with modern neuroscience, such experiences were profound and often terrifying. Healers, monks, and wise women were the keepers of this knowledge. They understood that small amounts could comfort the sick, calm the anxious, or soothe the grieving, while larger doses could bring hallucinations or even death. Their art was in preparation, dosage, and timing. They experimented with combinations of herbs, sometimes blending them with alcohol to temper bitterness or enhance effects. A drink that seemed simple could conceal a potent concoction capable of transporting the mind far from its earthly cage. The substances they used were not without risk. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake, and nightshade were just a few of the plants that promised release while threatening life. Belladonna might make the eyes appear brighter and the body feel light, but too much would cause delirium or fatal poisoning. Mandrake roots, with their human-like shapes, were both revered and feared. Ingesting them could produce powerful visions, convulsions, or unconsciousness. Henbane and other bitter herbs could ease pain and induce drowsy escape. But misjudging the dose could end a life in minutes. Knowledge of these plants was both precious and perilous. beyond their physical effects. These herbs carried deep cultural and spiritual significance. Many people believed that the altered states they produced were not merely chemical, but mystical. Visions, dreams, and hallucinations were interpreted as messages from gods, spirits, or ancestors. In a world filled with suffering, even a terrifying hallucination offered a form of understanding, a sense that life's chaos had meaning, or at least a momentary narrative to make sense of pain. The boundary between medicine, magic, and madness was thin and often invisible. The search for these experiences was not limited to the sick or desperate. Farmers, laborers, and even nobles occasionally experimented with potent plants to escape reality. In a society where life was defined by toil, famine, and the constant threat of disease or war, the mind became a battleground, and these herbs were weapons of liberation. The brave, or reckless, would risk hallucination, sickness, or death for a few hours of relief from relentless reality. For some, the experience became an obsession, a secret ritual repeated despite the dangers. In addition to ingestion, medieval people discovered other methods of interacting with these plants. Some herbs were burned, their smoke inhaled to carry active compounds into the lungs. Others were prepared as ointments or poultices, applied to the skin to produce gradual effects. These methods allowed for experimentation without immediate fatal consequences, though the risk was never eliminated. Curiosity, combined with necessity, drove them to push boundaries that modern science would later quantify. Ultimately, the use of these potent herbs reflects a fundamental truth about human nature. In the medieval era, people endured a life dominated by suffering, unpredictability, and mortality. The mind became a sanctuary, a place where pain could be softened, where imagination could take flight, and where temporary escape could be carved out from a harsh, relentless world. Herbs and plants offered this sanctuary, but they demanded respect, caution, and courage. Each encounter was a gamble with reality itself, sometimes transformative, sometimes fatal, but always compelling. Through these substances, medieval people discovered early forms of altered consciousness long before modern drugs or laboratories existed. They understood instinctively what the body and mind could endure and how far they could be pushed for relief. In a world without entertainment, medicine, or comfort, these herbs became more than plants. They became instruments of survival, portals to freedom, and mirrors reflecting the limits of human courage and curiosity. One of the most infamous and mysterious substances in the medieval world was the mandrake root. Its reputation was rooted in both its physical appearance and the powerful effects it produced on those who dared to consume it. The root itself often resembled a small human figure with twisted limbs and a gnarled torso. This eerie resemblance gave rise to countless myths, superstitions, and stories that have echoed through centuries. People whispered that the mandrake was alive, that it screamed when pulled from the ground, and that to hear its cry was to invite death or misfortune. Such tales made the plant simultaneously feared and sought after. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, the mandrake became a prized tool for altering the mind and escaping the harshness of daily existence. When prepared correctly, the mandrake root had profound effects on the human consciousness. Those who consumed it often experienced hallucinations so vivid that the boundaries between reality and imagination blurred completely. Ordinary objects seemed to shift and breathe. Familiar sounds could warp into voices, warnings, or omens. Some reported seeing figures from their past, visions of gods, or fantastic landscapes that seemed to exist somewhere between this world and another. These experiences were not fleeting. They could last hours, leaving the mind exhausted, exhilarated, or terrified. For the medieval observer, unfamiliar with the chemical or neurological mechanisms at play, such effects were interpreted as magical or supernatural, often attributed to the influence of spirits, curses, or divine forces. The sensation of leaving one's body was another remarkable effect of the mandrake. Consumers often described a feeling of detachment, as if their consciousness had lifted from their physical form and drifted elsewhere. Time seemed to stretch and contract unpredictably, turning minutes into hours and hours into fleeting moments. Pain, hunger, and fatigue temporarily vanished. For people trapped in the relentless toil of medieval life, this was not merely entertainment, it was liberation. To float above the body, even briefly, provided a sense of control over a world that otherwise offered very little. It was an experience both terrifying and addictive, drawing those who sought respite back to the mandrake again and again despite the risks. Preparation and dosage were critical. The root contained powerful alkaloids, substances that could heal, hallucinate, or kill depending on the amount consumed and the method of ingestion. A small portion might produce gentle euphoria and visions, while a slightly larger dose could induce convulsions, delirium, or even death. Medieval people developed careful techniques for handling mandrake. It might be roasted, soaked, ground into a powder, or mixed with wine or other herbs to temper its effects. The knowledge of how to prepare and consume it safely was jealously guarded by healers, herbalists, and occasionally by monks or witches. Mistakes were unforgiving, and many stories survive of those who suffered fatal consequences, serving as cautionary tales that only enhanced the plant's dark mystique. The cultural significance of mandrake extended far beyond its intoxicating properties. Its strange, human-like appearance and extraordinary effects made it central to folk rituals, magical practices, and superstitions. Some believed that mandrake could bring fertility, protect against evil, or unlock hidden powers of the mind. Others feared it as a harbinger of doom. Its use often straddled the line between medicine, magic, and taboo, making it one of the most potent symbols of the intersection between knowledge and danger in medieval society. Despite, or perhaps because of, its risks, the mandrake became a coveted substance. Those who sought its effects were often motivated by desperation, the need to escape pain, grief, or the monotony of life. Farmers, soldiers, laborers, and even members of the clergy occasionally turned to it in secret. The mandrake offered more than physical intoxication. It provided a form of psychological relief, an imaginative escape, and a temporary sense of mastery over the self and the world. For a few hours, the harshness of famine, disease, and unending labor could be suspended, replaced by visions, ecstasy, and a profound, if fleeting, sense of freedom. The mandrake's reputation grew as its effects were shared orally through stories and warnings. Tales of people disappearing into visions, of laughter turning to terror, or of souls drifting beyond the body reinforced its mysterious aura. For medieval people, such experiences were not merely chemical phenomena. They were lessons about the limits of human perception, the thin line between life and death, and the hidden powers of nature itself. Mandrake consumption was simultaneously a ritual, a risk, and a rare glimpse into a reality beyond ordinary experience. Ultimately, the mandrake root represents the medieval desire to escape the unyielding hardships of life, to explore consciousness, and to seek moments of transcendence in a world dominated by suffering. It was dangerous, mystical, and intoxicating, a symbol of both the power and fragility of the human mind. Through its use, people confronted their fears, tested their limits, and discovered the profound, unpredictable ways in which nature could alter reality. In a world without modern drugs, laboratories, or anesthesia, others, the mandrake, offered something far more valuable: the chance to leave the body behind and touch a glimpse of another world however briefly, however dangerously, and however mysteriously. Belladonna, more famously known as deadly nightshade, was one of the most feared yet sought after plants of the medieval world. Its beauty and danger were intertwined, and its effects on the human body and mind were both intoxicating and terrifying. Unlike simpler intoxicants like alcohol, belladonna had a mysterious, almost supernatural quality. Small amounts could alter perception, change the appearance of the eyes, and even influence mood, making it a potent tool for those who knew how to wield it. Yet its very power carried the constant risk of madness or death. A reminder that, in the medieval era, the line between life and ruin was always thin. One of the most fascinating effects of belladonna was its impact on appearance, particularly the eyes. Women seeking beauty and allure sometimes applied it to their faces or ingested it in tiny doses. The alkaloids in the plant caused the pupils to dilate, creating the illusion of larger, brighter, and more captivating eyes. In a society where physical appearance could enhance social standing, marriage prospects, or personal confidence, this effect was highly prized. Eyes that seemed to glow with unnatural intensity were considered alluring and even otherworldly. However, this cosmetic use was fraught with danger. Too much, or even a slightly miscalculated dose, could send the mind spiraling into confusion, delirium, or hallucinations. Beyond its cosmetic appeal, belladonna was also valued as a form of intoxication. Consumed carefully, it could produce sensations of lightness, warmth, and euphoria. Thoughts seemed to drift effortlessly, and the mundane reality of medieval life, the exhaustion, hunger, fear, and endless labor, could fade into the background. Users described vivid dreams, floating sensations, and a temporary disconnect from their physical selves. In a world defined by harsh survival, this mental escape was highly desirable. It offered a fleeting sense of control, a respite from the unyielding cruelty of life, and a brush with the extraordinary. Yet the margin between effect and disaster was razor thin. The active compounds in belladonna, alkaloids such as atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine, were highly potent. A dose just slightly larger than intended could induce intense confusion, paranoia, or terrifying hallucinations. The mind could turn against the body, causing agitation, delirium, and extreme fear. In some cases, poisoning occurred slowly as the body accumulated toxic compounds over hours or days, while in others, death came swiftly and unexpectedly. Stories of people driven to madness, of small villages mourning those who had experimented too boldly, were common. Despite these warnings, the allure of belladonna was impossible to resist for those desperate to escape pain or simply to experience something extraordinary. The plant was also used by healers and witches for medicinal purposes, though always with extreme caution. It could soothe pain, calm spasms, and induce sleep. But the line between remedy and poison was never certain. Preparing belladonna required precision. It had to be dried, powdered, diluted, or combined with other herbs to reduce its danger. Few people possessed the knowledge to use it safely. This secrecy added to the plant's mystique, casting it in a dual role as both friend and enemy. Those who wielded it correctly were respected for their skill, while those who miscalculated faced grave consequences. Cultural and spiritual beliefs further elevated belladonna's reputation. Its effects were often interpreted as magical or supernatural. Hallucinations, vivid dreams, and temporary insanity were attributed to spirits, curses, or divine messages. In a society that lacked scientific understanding of chemistry or neurology, such explanations were logical. Belladonna became entwined with folklore, rituals, and superstitions. Some believed it could ward off evil, enhance mystical abilities, or allow communication with other realms. The plant's dangerous potency only reinforced its status as a mysterious and powerful tool, one not to be taken lightly. Despite the risks, belladonna was widely sought after, not only by those seeking beauty or intoxication, but also by those desperate to escape the relentless hardships of life. Laborers, soldiers, nobles, and even members of the clergy sometimes experimented with it. Each encounter with belladonna was a delicate negotiation with mortality, a chance to glimpse freedom and transcendence, shadowed by the possibility of disaster. The plant symbolized both the extremes of human curiosity and the desperate need for relief from suffering. Ultimately, belladonna reflects the medieval struggle between desire and danger, between necessity and risk. In a world without modern medicine, without entertainment or comfort, and without safety nets, humans sought ways to soften reality and explore consciousness. Belladonna offered a doorway to another experience, a heightened awareness, altered perception, and temporary escape from the brutality of existence. But it demanded respect and caution, reminding all who approached it that even the smallest misstep could lead to insanity or death. Its beauty and peril became a metaphor for the medieval pursuit of relief. And its story echoes through time as a testament to human courage, curiosity, and the enduring quest to find light in the darkest of worlds. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 7 about monasteries and their use of herbal mixtures for meditation and visions, keeping the same immersive sleep, story, tone. Even monasteries, often seen as bastions of piety and strict religious observance, were not untouched by the mysterious allure of mind-altering substances. The monks who lived within their stone walls devoted their lives to prayer, contemplation, and the pursuit of divine understanding. Yet the demands of rigorous labor, fasting, and the weight of human suffering pressed heavily on their minds and bodies. Some of these monks turned to herbal mixtures not as an indulgence, but as a tool to aid meditation, enhance spiritual perception, and reach states of consciousness that ordinary prayer alone could not achieve. In a world where the divine often felt distant and unreachable, these substances offered a bridge between the earthly and the transcendent. The monks were careful and deliberate in their use of herbs. Unlike peasants or travelers who experimented out of necessity or curiosity, monastic knowledge was more structured and systematic. Recipes were passed down orally within the cloister, guarded closely, and sometimes written in coded scripts that only a select few could interpret. Certain herbs were believed to calm the mind, sharpen focus, or open the senses to spiritual insight. Others, more potent, were used sparingly to induce visions, dreams, or sensations of leaving the body entirely. The balance was delicate too little, and the effect was negligible too much, and the mind could fracture or the body could falter. Monks often combined these herbs with wine, water, or honey to create potions that were both more palatable and more effective. The process of preparation was itself a ritual, performed with reverence and caution. Grinding, boiling, and mixing required precision and patience, as a single misstep could transform a healing potion into a dangerous toxin. The act of creating the mixture was meditative, almost sacred, linking the physical labor with spiritual intention. Each step demanded attention, humility, and respect for the power held within the plants. The effects of these mixtures were profound. Monks reported experiences that went far beyond simple intoxication. Time seemed to slow. The world around them melted into patterns of light and shadow, and the boundaries between self and spirit became blurred. Some described traveling through visions of heaven and hell, encountering angels, demons, or ancestors. Others experienced a sense of detachment from their physical body, as if their consciousness had lifted and wandered in a realm inaccessible to ordinary perception. These moments were terrifying, inspiring, and transformative reinforcing the belief that the substances were divine instruments rather than mere chemicals. The use of these herbal mixtures was not without danger. While monks were often more knowledgeable and careful than laypeople, the potency of the plants remained unpredictable. Hallucinations could turn into delirium, visions into panic, and blissful detachment into disorientation. Even experienced users risked permanent mental disturbance or sudden illness. Despite these dangers, the potential rewards, insight, clarity, spiritual revelation, were considered worth the risk. In a life devoted to understanding the divine, such experiences were viewed not as indulgence, but as essential to the pursuit of higher knowledge. Culturally, the use of herbs in monasteries was tolerated within certain bounds, though it remained shrouded in secrecy. The Church maintained strict rules about acceptable practices, emphasizing prayer, fasting, and Scripture as the proper means of communion with God. Yet many monks quietly continued these practices, convinced that the herbal aids were not sinful, but tools to deepen spiritual experience. Their knowledge existed in a delicate balance, powerful, secret, and rarely acknowledged outside the cloister walls. Monasteries also served as centers of preservation for herbal knowledge. Herbs were grown in gardens, cultivated with care, and studied systematically. Monks recorded their effects, experimented cautiously, and shared their findings with trusted peers. In many ways, the cloister acted as an early laboratory, where observation, ritual, and empirical experience combined. The goal was not entertainment or escape from suffering, as it was for peasants or travelers, but spiritual enhancement, insight, and communion with a higher power. This pursuit highlights the human desire to transcend ordinary experience. Even in places dedicated to discipline and devotion, the boundaries of consciousness were explored, and substances that altered the mind were employed thoughtfully and reverently. Monks recognized that the human body and mind were limited vessels in an immense universe of possibility. Herbs, carefully prepared and consumed, became instruments for bridging that gap, offering glimpses into realms that could not be accessed through prayer alone. Ultimately, the use of herbal mixtures in monasteries reflects the medieval interplay between knowledge, risk, and the human yearning for transcendence. It shows that even in the most disciplined, austere environments, people sought ways to expand consciousness, to touch the divine, and to experience reality beyond its harshest limitations. These secret practices, hidden behind stone walls and whispered among trusted circles, reveal a side of medieval life that was daring, experimental, and profoundly human, a side in which the mind itself became a territory to be explored, tested, and, for brief moments, liberated from the strictures of the world. In pagan traditions, intoxication was rarely a solitary experience. It was woven into the fabric of ritual, ceremony, and communal belief. Across forests, hills, and hidden clearings, people gathered to celebrate, to honor gods, or to mark the cycles of the seasons. Fire was central to these ceremonies, its flames flickering against the night sky, casting shadows that danced like living spirits. Herbs were burned alongside the fire, their smoke curling through the air, carrying with it the essence of plants that could alter the mind and senses. Inhaling this smoke was not considered mere indulgence. It was a sacred act, a deliberate bridge between the mortal world and realms beyond ordinary perception. The smoke from these herbs entered the body through the lungs, delivering its potent compounds directly to the bloodstream. Effects were immediate for many participants. The heart might race, the senses sharpened, and colors and shapes could shift and shimmer in ways that seemed magical. Sounds became layered and alive, and music from drums, flutes, or singing echoed in unpredictable patterns. The combination of sound, light, movement, and scent created a multi-sensory experience that was overwhelming, intoxicating, and transformative. Those who inhaled deeply often described leaving their bodies, feeling themselves dissolve into the flames, the earth, and the night sky itself. Pagan rituals were highly structured yet flexible. The choice of herbs, the order of their burning, and the timing of inhalation were all carefully considered. Some herbs were chosen for calming, others for hallucinatory effects. Participants might sit, dance, or chant in unison, guided by elders or shamans who understood the plant's effects. The rhythm of the ceremony, the shared intention, and the communal focus all amplified the experience. In these moments, boundaries between individuals blurred. People felt interconnected, not only with each other, but with the elements, spirits, and unseen forces that were believed to inhabit the world. Intoxication became a tool of connection as much as escape. The effects were often unpredictable. While some participants experienced visions of gods, ancestors, or mystical landscapes, others encountered fear, confusion, or disorientation. Hallucinations could be vivid, terrifying, or euphoric. The elders or ritual leaders, experienced in handling the powerful herbs, guided the participants through the journey, offering reassurance and symbolic interpretation. What might have seemed terrifying to the uninitiated was framed as a necessary step in spiritual understanding or personal transformation. The line between healing, initiation, and danger was thin, yet that thinness defined the ritual's potency. Herbal smoke was not the only method employed. Some ceremonies included consumption of brewed drinks, crushed roots, or infused ointments applied to the skin. In each case, the goal was the same: to alter consciousness, to lift the veil of mundane reality, and to access knowledge, insight, or experience that could not be attained in ordinary states. Rituals were carefully timed to coincide with celestial events, seasonal changes, or significant community milestones, reinforcing the belief that human consciousness was deeply linked to the natural world. Herbs, fire, and ceremony together created an ecosystem of transcendence, where mind, body, and spirit could be stretched and tested. The risks were evident, yet embraced. Many plants used in these rituals were potent, sometimes toxic. Overindulgence could lead to illness, permanent mental disturbance, or death. Inhaling too deeply, consuming too much, or misidentifying a herb could have catastrophic consequences. Yet the possibility of a glimpse into another world outweighed fear. The pursuit of altered states was not reckless in the eyes of participants. It was courageous, purposeful, and deeply meaningful. Through these experiences, people confronted mortality, pain, and limitation, stepping beyond the ordinary boundaries of human life. These rituals also served a social purpose. Shared intoxication strengthened bonds between participants, creating collective memory and identity. Villagers, travelers, and shamans alike remembered the ceremonies, passing knowledge of herbs, chants, and techniques from one generation to the next. The rituals preserved cultural identity, spiritual wisdom, and herbal knowledge in a form that was alive, practical, and experiential. Each inhalation of smoke, each step around the fire, became a lesson, a rite of passage, and a connection to the world that was both visible and hidden. Ultimately, pagan rituals involving herbal smoke reflect the human drive to transcend the limits of ordinary consciousness. Inhaling the fumes of powerful plants was not a mere indulgence or attempt to escape reality. It was a deliberate journey, a ritualized confrontation with the mind's potential and the mysteries of existence. Participants sought visions, insight, and connection, while acknowledging that danger was never far. These ceremonies reveal a side of medieval life in which the mind itself became a territory to explore, a tool to understand the unseen, and a means to navigate the hardships of the tangible world. Through smoke, fire, and shared intention, medieval people found pathways into altered states, fleeting freedom, and communion with forces that were otherwise inaccessible. Women who practiced healing, midwifery, and herbal medicine occupied a precarious position in medieval society. On one hand, they were invaluable to their communities. Possessing knowledge of plants, remedies, and natural methods for easing pain, treating illness, and even facilitating childbirth. On the other hand, their expertise made them targets of suspicion, fear, and accusations of witchcraft. These women, often called healers, wise women, or cunning folk, preserved centuries of knowledge about herbs that could soothe the body, calm the mind, or transport consciousness into strange and altered states. Yet, the very potency of their craft could be interpreted as malevolent by those who did not understand it, or by authorities seeking control. Many of the herbs and roots they used were powerful, sometimes dangerously so. Mandrake, belladonna, henbane, and other substances could bring hallucinations, induce euphoria, or quiet pain. The knowledge of how to use them safely was passed down orally, often in secrecy, to protect both the practitioner and the patient. Healers understood the subtle balance between remedy and poison, and they relied on experience, observation, and intuition to administer their treatments. Their skill was honed over years. Yet even the most knowledgeable could fall victim to miscalculation, as the plants themselves were unpredictable and potent. Despite their intentions, these women were often accused of corrupting society or consorting with evil forces. Communities that feared the power of the herbs or the unexplained effects they produced could turn suspicion into accusation. A woman whose remedies caused unusual visions or unexpected side effects might be labeled a witch. Pregnancies that ended tragically. Illnesses that persisted despite her treatments, or simply her knowledge of plants that could alter the mind. All of these could be twisted into evidence of dark magic, the same herbs that offered relief and escape from suffering became symbols of danger and evil in the eyes of fearful onlookers. Accusations were not limited to poor villages. Even in towns and cities, women with advanced herbal knowledge were watched with suspicion. Church authorities, magistrates, and neighbors all played roles in enforcing conformity and punishing those who strayed from accepted norms. The line between healer and witch was thin, and crossing it could lead to public humiliation, imprisonment, or execution. These dangers forced many women to practice in secret, carefully choosing patients and controlling the use of their knowledge. Secrecy became a form of survival, and oral transmission of herbal wisdom was a necessary safeguard against persecution. Yet fear and accusation could not entirely suppress the use of these powerful plants. Communities continued to seek out healers, especially in times of sickness, childbirth, or mental distress. People craved relief from the harshness of life, and the remedies these women provided, though misunderstood, were often effective. Pain could be eased, anxiety calmed, and the mind temporarily freed from suffering. The herbs offered a rare glimpse of control in a world dominated by hunger, disease, and mortality. Healers became both indispensable and feared, walking a fine line between salvation and danger. The tension between fear and reliance created a complex social dynamic. While accusations of witchcraft spread paranoia, the practical benefits of herbal medicine ensured that healers retained influence. Their knowledge of mind-altering substances, which allowed people to experience hallucinations, euphoria, or detachment from reality, was particularly suspect. Communities often tolerated these effects, grudgingly recognizing their value, even while condemning the perceived moral or spiritual risks. The result was a delicate balance. The healer's power was acknowledged, yet constantly threatened by social, religious, and legal pressures. For the women themselves, the work was both empowering and perilous. Each administration of a potent herb required skill, intuition, and courage. They knew that success could save lives, soothe suffering, and even inspire awe, while mistakes could provoke fear, madness, or death. In using these substances, they navigated not only the physical effects on the body and mind, but also the complex social and spiritual landscape that surrounded them. Their practice was an art and a science, one performed in a society that simultaneously depended on it and distrusted it. Ultimately, the story of medieval healers and wise women reveals a society grappling with the mysteries of the human mind and the natural world. The use of intoxicating herbs was neither trivial nor recreational. It was a serious, skillful attempt to understand, control, and alleviate suffering. Yet it was also fraught with danger, misunderstanding, and persecution. The women who preserved this knowledge walked a path that was as treacherous as it was vital. Through their courage, skill, and resilience, they maintained a bridge between ordinary life and extraordinary experience, a bridge that offered relief, insight, and, for brief moments, escape from the relentless hardships of medieval existence. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 10 about village festivals and communal intoxication, keeping the same immersive and sleep, friendly tone. Village festivals in medieval times were rare but transformative events, offering a brief respite from the relentless labor, fear, and suffering that defined daily life. These celebrations were occasions where the boundaries of ordinary reality could be loosened, where music, fire, dance, and intoxication combined to create a shared experience unlike any other. For most villagers, the festival was not just entertainment. It was survival, a way to release the pent-up exhaustion, grief, and anxiety that had accumulated over months of toil. In these fleeting moments, the harshness of life softened, and the mind could wander freely, unbound by the constant pressures of work, hunger, or fear. Alcohol was central to these gatherings, as it had been in daily life, but in a much more celebratory and communal sense. Taverns, homes, and open squares were filled with the smell of beer, wine, and fermented beverages brewed locally. Even those who rarely drank during ordinary days found themselves participating in the shared intoxication of the festival. Drinking was not solitary or secretive. It was communal, a shared ritual that bonded people together through laughter, song, and the temporary suspension of worry. The effects of alcohol were amplified by the collective energy of the crowd, creating an atmosphere of heightened emotion, connection, and sensory intensity. Herbs and other mind-altering substances sometimes complemented the alcohol. Smoke from burning plants, infused beverages, or crushed roots added layers of experience, producing visions, euphoria, and altered perception. People might see colors more vividly, hear music in strange harmonics, or feel as though the boundaries of their bodies had dissolved. What would be frightening or overwhelming alone became exhilarating in the context of shared celebration. The village itself became a stage for altered reality, a living theater where ordinary life was suspended, and collective experience took precedence over individual fear or suffering. Dancing was central to the festival experience. Villagers moved in circles, lines, or pairs, guided by the rhythm of drums, flutes, and other instruments. The combination of movement, sound, and intoxication induced a trance-like state, deepening the effect of alcohol and herbs on the mind. The repetitive motion and communal rhythm created a sense of unity, as if participants were part of a larger force or natural pattern. For hours, the boundaries between self and other dissolved, leaving only the raw, shared sensation of life, movement, and release. Storytelling and music further enhanced the experience. Tales of heroes, spirits, gods, and ancestors were recited or sung, often in exaggerated, fantastical forms. The combination of narrative, intoxication, and ritual created a powerful sensory tapestry, one in which imagination and reality intertwined. Participants could feel themselves stepping into the stories, experiencing them as though they were living them. Laughter, awe, and fear all mingled, creating a complex emotional experience that deepened social bonds and strengthened cultural memory. Even children and young people were sometimes included, though in smaller, weaker doses of alcohol or gentler herbs. They learned, through observation and participation, the rhythms, techniques, and etiquette of communal intoxication. Festivals were as much about education and social cohesion as they were about release. Everyone, regardless of age, was connected through the shared experience of altered perception, storytelling, and music. The village itself became a living organism, pulsing with energy, collective memory, and the transformative power of ritual. Despite the joy, danger was never far away. Overindulgence could lead to illness, accidents, or fainting. Herbal experiments might go wrong, producing hallucinations that terrified even experienced participants. Yet the risks were accepted, understood as part of the ritual and the price of freedom from ordinary suffering. In a world dominated by labor, hunger, and disease, the festival's moments of collective intoxication were precious and sacred, providing relief that could not be found elsewhere. These festivals also reinforced social structure and cohesion. They allowed villagers to negotiate relationships, resolve disputes, and reaffirm alliances under the temporary veil of altered consciousness. The shared experience of intoxication created empathy and understanding, as well as collective joy, in a society that otherwise emphasized hierarchy, toil, and survival. For a few hours, peasants, artisans, and laborers could step out of the harsh roles assigned to them and participate in something greater, something unifying, and something transformative. Ultimately, village festivals were a microcosm of the medieval approach to intoxication and altered states. They combined alcohol, herbs, music, dance, storytelling. Others call in communal energy to create a controlled, albeit temporary, escape from the relentless pressures of life. Through these events, people accessed relief, connection, and insight in a way that individual consumption alone could never achieve. In the flickering light of fires and the throbbing rhythm of drums, the medieval mind found moments of freedom, joy, and transcendence, a rare glimpse of something beyond suffering, if only for a night. Despite the temporary relief that alcohol, herbs, and ritual intoxication could provide, the dangers and costs of these practices were ever present in medieval life. The pursuit of altered states was not without consequence, and those who sought to escape the harsh realities of existence often walked a narrow path between temporary bliss and permanent harm. Life itself was already fragile and adding substances that could distort perception, weaken the body, or disrupt the mind intensified the risks. Every sip, every inhalation, every carefully prepared herbal concoction carried the possibility of unintended consequences, a reminder that the quest for relief was never without peril. Alcohol, though ubiquitous and socially accepted, could be deceptively dangerous. Daily consumption in taverns, homes, and fields dulled pain and numbed fatigue, but long-term use took its toll. Livers and kidneys suffered silently, and many adults became weakened by habitual drinking. Accidents were common drunken missteps, falls from ladders or horses, and injuries during labor could result in permanent disability or death. Social disputes often escalated under the influence, with brawls and arguments turning violent. Even seemingly mild intoxication could shift perception, leading to errors in judgment that carried severe consequences. Yet the drink was almost unavoidable, not merely a pleasure, but a lifeline in a world where clean water, comfort, and rest were scarce. Herbal intoxication carried even greater risks. Plants like mandrake, belladonna, and henbane were powerful tools for mental escape, but their margin of safety was narrow. Consuming too much could induce convulsions, delirium, or psychosis, sometimes leading to permanent damage. Preparation mistakes, too much root, improper drying, or incorrect combination could turn a beneficial potion into a deadly one. Families lived in constant awareness of these dangers, and yet the very need to escape hunger, pain, and fear often outweighed caution. Those who survived the risks gained temporary freedom from suffering, but others were not so fortunate, leaving behind stories of tragedy that became part of oral history and folklore. Even communal intoxication, such as during festivals or pagan rituals, carried hidden costs. In the euphoria of shared experience, participants often lost track of limits. Strong herbal smoke or alcoholic brews could push people beyond safe thresholds, producing visions or sensations that were disorienting, terrifying, or physically dangerous. Children and inexperienced participants were particularly vulnerable, and accidents, falls, or poisoning were not uncommon. Elders and ritual leaders attempted to guide the experience, but the unpredictable nature of the substances meant that danger was always a part of the ritual. In this sense, intoxication was both gift and risk, a fleeting liberation intertwined with potential catastrophe. Psychological consequences were also significant. Extended or repeated exposure to potent herbs could leave lingering effects on cognition and perception. Hallucinations, paranoia, or anxiety could persist long after the substance had worn off. For some, the mind became dependent on these experiences, seeking escape repeatedly in a cycle that blurred the line between relief and addiction. Communities sometimes viewed such individuals with suspicion or fear, associating their altered behavior with spiritual imbalance or moral weakness. The social and mental costs of intoxication therefore, extended far beyond the immediate physical risks, affecting relationships, status, and personal security. Moreover, religious and legal oversight added another layer of danger. Clergy, magistrates, and local authorities often condemned the use of herbs or alcohol beyond socially accepted norms. Women healers, shamans, and even common folk could be accused of witchcraft or heresy if their use of intoxicants produced unusual effects. Punishments ranged from public shaming to imprisonment, torture, or execution. Knowledge of potent herbs, while valuable, became a source of fear and suspicion. The intersection of physical danger, social pressure, and legal threat made intoxication a perilous endeavor, even for those with experience and skill. Despite all these risks, the human need for relief and altered perception remained relentless. Medieval people were acutely aware of the dangers, yet they were also aware of the unbearable weight of unending labor, pain, hunger, and grief. Intoxication, whether through alcohol, herbs, or ritual, offered a fleeting glimpse of freedom, a temporary release from suffering that could not be found through ordinary means. It was a calculated risk, a gamble between pleasure and peril, consciousness and chaos, life and death. Ultimately, the dangers of intoxication in medieval life reveal the delicate balance between survival, experience, and human curiosity. The mind and body were both fragile and resilient, constantly tested by the environment, society, and the substances chosen to cope with it. Those who sought altered states did so knowing the costs, and yet their pursuit highlights a fundamental aspect of medieval existence. In a world dominated by hardship, fear, and mortality, even temporary relief was worth the risk. Intoxication was never merely indulgence. It was survival, exploration, and a defiant assertion of human need against a cruel and unforgiving world. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 12 on the spiritual interpretations of intoxication and visions, keeping the same immersive, sleep-friendly tone. In the medieval world, intoxication was rarely seen as a purely physical experience. Instead, it was deeply intertwined with spiritual interpretation. People believed that the mind, when altered by alcohol, herbs, or ritual substances, could catch glimpses of realms beyond ordinary perception. A hallucination might be a message from a deity, a warning from ancestors, or an encounter with spirits. Dreams and visions were often interpreted as signs of divine favor, curses, or impending events. The blurred boundary between reality and the altered state created a complex tapestry in which every experience carried meaning beyond the mere chemical effects of the substances consumed. Religious and cultural beliefs shaped the way these experiences were understood and integrated into daily life. Monks, wise women, shamans, and elders often acted as intermediaries, helping interpret visions or altered perceptions. A hallucination could be terrifying or disorienting on its own. But when explained within a spiritual framework, it became a tool for guidance, insight, or healing. For instance, a vivid vision during a festival might be seen as a blessing, a warning, or a revelation, rather than a side effect of intoxication. The same chemical experience, without context, might have been terrifying. With context, it became meaningful, even transformative. Spiritual interpretations were not limited to the elite or clergy. Villagers, laborers, and travelers alike participated in rituals, festivals, and communal intoxication, and they too sought meaning in their altered states. A hallucinatory experience could be recounted around the fire, discussed with family or neighbors, or interpreted during seasonal celebrations. These shared interpretations reinforced social bonds, preserved cultural knowledge, and created collective understanding. Intoxication became not only a personal escape from suffering, but also a communal lens through which the world's mysteries were explored. The Church, however, often viewed these practices with suspicion. While some clergy tolerated herbal and alcoholic use for medicinal or ritual purposes, others condemned visions and altered states that did not conform to accepted doctrine. Experiences outside sanctioned religious channels could be interpreted as demonic influence or heresy. A person reporting visions during intoxication risked social censure, spiritual condemnation, or even punishment. This tension created a delicate balance. Individuals sought insight and relief through altered consciousness, but they had to navigate the social and religious frameworks that judged their experiences. Herbs, in particular, were laden with spiritual significance. Mandrake, belladonna, henbane, and other potent plants were often viewed as tools that could open doors to other worlds. A hallucination induced by mandrake might be a window to hidden knowledge, a conversation with the dead, or a test of courage and wisdom. Belladonna, which made the eyes shine and perception intensify, was sometimes interpreted as granting mystical sight. Ingesting or inhaling these substances was never purely recreational. It was a deliberate act with spiritual, psychological, and social dimensions. Even alcohol carried symbolic weight. Beer and wine, while essential for daily survival, also played roles in festivals, religious ceremonies, and communal gatherings. Intoxication in these contexts was not merely about physical effects. It was a medium through which people felt closer to divine forces, ancestors, or the natural world. Shared drinking, particularly when combined with music, dance, and storytelling, created a liminal space where ordinary rules were suspended and the extraordinary became accessible. The communal aspect amplified spiritual interpretation, as participants collectively attributed meaning to experiences that might otherwise have seemed chaotic or random. Dreams and visions produced by these substances were recorded orally, sometimes carefully preserved as advice, warnings, or stories. The interpretation of these experiences informed decisions, guided healing practices, and shaped rituals. People learned to recognize patterns, to discern warnings from trivial hallucinations, and to integrate altered states into practical, spiritual, and social life. Intoxication became both a tool for navigating the harshness of the physical world and a guide for understanding forces beyond it. Ultimately, the spiritual interpretation of intoxication reflects the medieval effort to reconcile human experience with an often incomprehensible world. Altered states were both feared and revered, dangerous and enlightening. They offered insight, relief, and connection, while also testing the mind, body, and social boundaries. Medieval people understood that what the modern mind might label as chemical effects were, for them, encounters with hidden truths, divine messages, or spiritual challenges. Intoxication, in this sense, was not merely a pursuit of pleasure or escape. Some call it was a profound engagement with the mysteries of existence, a way to navigate suffering, and a method for glimpsing realities that ordinary consciousness could not reach. Knowledge of intoxicating plants was not only a matter of curiosity or ritual. It was a cornerstone of medieval medicine and survival. In a world where disease, injury, and malnutrition were rampant, and where the boundaries between life and death were precariously thin, the ability to manipulate the mind and body through herbs could mean the difference between life and suffering. Alcohol, mandrake, belladonna, henbane, and countless other plants were more than recreational tools. They were practical instruments of healing, pain relief, and psychological resilience, integrated into everyday life in ways that modern society often overlooks. Healers, wise women, monks, and shamans developed sophisticated knowledge about dosage, preparation, and combination. They observed the effects of plants on themselves and their patients over years, even decades, refining their understanding of which substances could alleviate pain, induce sleep, or quiet fever. Mandrake, for example, could dull extreme pain or bring sedation to a patient undergoing a dangerous procedure. Belladonna, in small quantities, might relieve cramps or enhance sensory perception for spiritual or diagnostic purposes. Even toxic plants, when carefully measured, became vital tools in the medieval pharmacopoeia. Mistakes were perilous, but the benefits were undeniable, and experience was the greatest teacher. Alcohol was equally important in medicine. Beer and wine were not merely social lubricants or daily sustenance. They were fundamental to administering remedies. Many herbs and roots were bitter, pungent, or otherwise unpalatable, and mixing them with alcohol masked unpleasant flavors, while also carrying the active compounds into the body more effectively. Wine infused with herbs could induce sleep, reduce pain, or act as a mild sedative, while beer served as a safe vehicle for oral administration. In hospitals, monasteries, and homes alike, alcohol-based remedies were common, reflecting a deep understanding of both physiology and psychology in a world without modern pharmacology. Beyond the immediate physical effects, intoxicating plants had profound psychological and social significance. Pain, grief, fear, and exhaustion dominated everyday life for peasants, soldiers, and laborers. The ability to alter consciousness through herbs, alcohol, or smoke provided temporary relief, allowing people to endure hardships that would otherwise be unbearable. It was a survival strategy as much as a medicinal practice. People learned to respect the potency of these substances, to understand their risks, and to integrate them carefully into daily life. Sometimes as part of a community ritual, other times as private relief. This knowledge was also essential for childbirth, one of the most dangerous moments in medieval life. Midwives relied on herbs like mandrake, belladonna, and other anesthetic plants to ease the intense pain of labor. Alcohol might be administered to calm the mother or soften the experience of prolonged labor. The margin for error was narrow too little, and the pain remained unbearable too much, and both mother and child were at risk. Survival depended not only on skill, but on a deep understanding of the body's response to these substances. The healer's knowledge of intoxicating plants could literally save lives in moments where failure often meant death. Wounds, infections, and chronic illness also fell under the purview of these substances. Herbal pastes, infusions, and ointments were used to cleanse wounds, reduce inflammation, and induce a state in which patients could endure pain or remain still for treatment. Mental distress, anxiety, and trauma, common consequences of medieval hardship, were treated with calming herbs, alcohol, or ritualistic consumption. In an era without modern medicine, the capacity to influence mind and body pharmacologically was revolutionary. It was practical, empirical, and at times, life-saving. The knowledge of intoxicating plants was rarely documented openly. Recipes, dosages, and preparation techniques were guarded, shared orally among trusted practitioners, or hidden in cryptic manuscripts. This secrecy was a safeguard against misuse, persecution, and accidental death. Witches, healers, and monks all recognized that the power of these substances carried moral, social, and physical responsibilities. Their use reflected a complex understanding that combined survival, medicine, psychology, and spirituality into a single framework. Each plant was a tool, a teacher, and a potential threat, demanding respect and careful handling. Ultimately, the use of intoxicating plants demonstrates the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and courage of medieval people. In a world of constant suffering, the knowledge of herbs, roots, and alcohol allowed them to survive, to heal, and to glimpse moments of freedom from pain. It was a science born of necessity, observation, and courage, a system that bridged the gap between medicine, magic, and human experience. Through these substances, people navigated life's harsh realities, discovered hidden capacities of the mind, and found ways to endure, adapt, and sometimes even transcend their grim surroundings. Knowledge of intoxicating plants was not a luxury. It was a lifeline, a secret arsenal against the unrelenting pressures of medieval existence. Access to intoxicating substances in medieval society was deeply influenced by social hierarchy. While peasants, laborers, and villagers had access to alcohol and certain herbs, the quality, potency, and variety of these substances were often limited. Beer, weak wine, and common herbs were staples, but more exotic or powerful plants, mandrake, belladonna, and imported spices, were frequently reserved for wealthier individuals, the clergy, or skilled healers. This division reflected both the practical realities of trade and cultivation and the social control of substances that could influence the mind and, indirectly, power. In a world where knowledge and access to potent plants could alter perception, even slightly, the distribution of these resources shaped the experiences and opportunities of different classes. For peasants and common laborers, alcohol was often the primary means of escape from harsh daily life. Weak beer or diluted wine was consumed as part of meals, during festivals, and at communal gatherings. It provided warmth, comfort, and temporary relief from hunger and fatigue. Occasionally, they might gain access to more potent herbs, particularly in rural areas where wild plants grew freely, but their use required skill and knowledge that was not widespread. These plants were often treated with caution, passed down orally within families, and used sparingly due to the risk of poisoning. Even within the lower classes, knowledge of potent herbs could grant a measure of autonomy, allowing individuals to mediate their own physical and mental states in a world that offered few alternatives. Wealthier individuals, nobles, and clergy had more consistent access to refined alcohol, imported herbs, and exotic concoctions. Wine of higher quality, distilled spirits in some regions, and rare plants like mandrake or certain nightshades were within reach for those with means. This access allowed them not only to indulge, but also to explore altered states with greater safety and sophistication. Monasteries, noble households, and urban centers often served as repositories of specialized knowledge, where medicinal use, ritual experimentation, and even recreational exploration were carefully documented and practiced. The wealthier classes could afford to mitigate risks through controlled preparation, skilled guidance, and selective consumption, while poorer populations faced higher uncertainty and danger with the same substances. Social hierarchy also dictated the perception of intoxication. When nobles, monks, or wealthy patrons used alcohol or herbal mixtures, it was often framed as a mark of refinement, spiritual pursuit, or sophisticated knowledge. A monk using herbs to enhance meditation, or a noble enjoying a potent wine infusion, might be seen as enlightened or courageous. In contrast, similar practices among peasants or common laborers were often stigmatized, interpreted as recklessness, immorality, or even witchcraft. The same chemical effects, euphoria, altered perception. Visions were understood differently depending on the social status of the participant. Social standing provided both protection and legitimacy, shaping not only the experience of intoxication, but also the consequences of its misuse. The disparity in access extended beyond alcohol and herbs to the knowledge of their preparation and effects. Many powerful plants required careful handling, precise dosage, and skilled preparation to be used safely. Monks, wise women, and professional healers often held this knowledge, sometimes selling or sharing it selectively. Those outside these trusted circles had limited ability to harness the plant's full potential without risking harm. Social hierarchy thus determined not only who could access intoxicating substances, but also who could navigate their dangers safely, creating a subtle but profound influence on medieval life. Communal practices reflected these inequalities as well. Festivals and village gatherings allowed for some leveling, where the effects of alcohol and shared rituals created temporary equality in altered experience. Yet, even then, access to the most potent herbs or knowledge of their use often remained restricted to elders, ritual leaders, or local healers. The broader population could participate and experience joy, release, or relief, but the deepest or most transformative effects remained elusive to most. In this way, social hierarchy not only dictated material and cultural access, but also shaped the psychological and spiritual landscapes available to different classes. Ultimately, the distribution of intoxicating substances in medieval society illustrates the intersection of survival, pleasure, knowledge, and power. Access, preparation, and legitimacy were deeply intertwined with social standing. Alcohol, herbs, and ritualized intoxication were not simply tools for enjoyment. They were instruments that shaped perception, reinforced hierarchy, and mediated the relationship between the individual and the harsh world around them. In every household, monastery, and festival, the presence or absence of these substances reflected broader social realities, revealing how the pursuit of altered consciousness was inextricably bound to the rigid structures of medieval life. Those with access could explore, survive, and even transcend, while others remained constrained by circumstance. Yet all shared in the fundamental human need to seek relief, understanding, and the rare taste of freedom from suffering. The story of intoxication in medieval times is not merely a chronicle of herbs, alcohol, and rituals. It is a reflection of human resilience, ingenuity, and the constant search for relief in a world defined by hardship. over centuries. The use of intoxicating substances shaped not only individual lives, but also the broader culture, medicine, and social structures of the medieval world. What might appear today as superstition or folly was, in reality, a sophisticated system of knowledge, survival, and exploration of human consciousness, honed through observation, experimentation, and necessity. Alcohol, as the most common intoxicant, shaped daily routines, social interactions, and even commerce. Beer and wine were more than beverages. They were nutritional staples, medicinal tools, and vehicles for community cohesion. Others call families and neighbors gathered around tables, sharing drink and conversation, finding warmth and camaraderie in an otherwise harsh existence. Festivals amplified these effects, transforming ordinary alcohol into a conduit for shared joy, storytelling, and ritualized experience. The communal intoxication reinforced bonds, strengthened traditions, and offered temporary escape from the unrelenting pressures of medieval life, illustrating the social power of even the simplest substances. Herbal intoxication went deeper, combining medicine, ritual, and altered perception. Plants like mandrake, belladonna, henbane, and others were used to induce visions, relieve pain, or enhance spiritual awareness. Monks, healers, and shamans refined their knowledge through careful experimentation, preserving oral traditions, codifying recipes, and integrating observation with spiritual interpretation. These substances offered not just pleasure or relief, but a bridge to experiences that transcended the physical world, visions of divine entities, the sensation of leaving one's body, and moments of ecstasy that blurred the line between life and the unknown. The combination of risk and reward made the practice both revered and feared, producing a culture that understood power, danger, and the fragile nature of human consciousness. The spiritual dimension of intoxication cannot be overstated. Medieval people interpreted altered states as messages, omens, or divine encounters. Visions were decoded by elders, monks, or ritual leaders, providing guidance, warnings, or insights into complex moral and social dilemmas. Even recreational intoxication carried undertones of the mystical, as alcohol, herbs, and ritualized practices were framed within a worldview in which the mundane and the supernatural were intertwined. The mind, when liberated from ordinary perception, became a canvas for spiritual, social, and psychological exploration, giving meaning to experiences that might otherwise be dismissed as hallucination or madness. Intoxication also shaped medicine. Alcohol and herbal preparations were critical tools in treating pain, illness, childbirth, and mental distress. They allowed patients to endure physical suffering, provided healers with mechanisms for care, and created the foundation for a sophisticated, empirical understanding of plant effects. While modern science would later replace these methods, medieval societies developed a remarkable depth of knowledge about dosage, preparation, and interaction, combining observation with ritual to enhance efficacy and safety. Life and death often hung in the balance, and intoxicating plants were sometimes the difference between survival and tragedy. Social hierarchy mediated access to these substances, influencing who could explore altered states safely and fully. Nobles, clergy, and wealthy households had access to potent herbs, high-quality wine, and skilled preparation, while peasants relied on weaker alcohol and common plants, often supplemented with the guidance of local healers. Festivals, rituals, and communal consumption allowed some leveling, but access to the most powerful substances and knowledge remained concentrated, reinforcing social structure and cultural control. Intoxication, therefore, was both a personal and social experience, reflecting power, opportunity, and the distribution of knowledge in medieval society. The dangers were ever present. Overindulgence, miscalculation, or misuse could lead to injury, illness, madness, or death. Women healers faced accusations of witchcraft. Commoners risked public censure or physical harm. Even monks and nobles navigated the fine line between benefit and disaster. Yet, the very existence of these risks underscores the courage and ingenuity of those who used intoxicants to cope with life, explore consciousness, and maintain health. The medieval approach to intoxication was an exercise in careful observation, experimentation, and respect for the profound power of nature. Ultimately, medieval practices of intoxication reveal a culture that sought balance between survival, pleasure, and understanding. Alcohol, herbs, and ritualized consumption provided relief from suffering, insight into the mind, and glimpses of the unknown. They shaped medicine, spiritual practice, communal life, and the social landscape. In a world dominated by hardship, these substances offered freedom, however temporary, and a profound assertion of human agency against the relentless pressures of existence. Through them, medieval people navigated danger, explored consciousness, and transformed the ordinary into moments of wonder, insight, and fleeting transcendence. The legacy of these practices endures in subtle ways. Folklore, medicinal knowledge, and ritual traditions carry traces of the experimentation, courage, and curiosity that defined medieval intoxication. By understanding these practices, we glimpse a world in which humans, constrained by environment and society, sought to master their own minds, to endure suffering, and to touch experiences beyond the tangible. It was a world of danger and discovery, pain and ecstasy, and through the lens of intoxication, the medieval mind reveals its relentless pursuit of relief, understanding, and the rare, fragile taste of freedom.